I'm going to be taking you on a ride into the future. There are so many technological advancements that are coming to fruition right now that it is just simply amazing. Our world is going to change at a pace that's faster than any of us in history have ever experienced. So this morning, I'd like to take you on a bit of a ride into the future and tie it into the implications for healthcare provisions, as well as showing you some cutting-edge health developments and what some of the new jobs of the future are going to be. So let's start with a concept that you may have heard of, smart cities. Anyone hear of that? Yeah. We're talking about putting sensors everywhere and connecting literally everything to the internet. It's the Internet of Things. Here's an example from Italy on what they're doing that's saving them a lot of money. Trenitalia has deployed sensors throughout their train fleet. And normally, they would spend 1.3 billion euros per year on maintenance and do their maintenance on a scheduled basis. But because they have deployed sensors, they're now doing maintenance on an as-needed basis rather than just because it's scheduled. And as a result, they're saving between 8 and 10% per annum on their maintenance cost. No doubt, there are pieces of equipment in New South Wales Health that also need to be maintained on a regular basis. By deploying sensors, you may be able to achieve similar savings. Another example of the Internet of Things is taking place in the city of Chicago. I was out there last year, and they have a project that's called the Array of Things. And it looks like a beehive, and it's a cluster of sensors that they're deploying on traffic lights throughout the city. When it's fully rolled out, they'll have about 500 of these Array of Things nodes deployed. And in them, they will be able to measure all sorts of things about micro-neighborhoods. The temperature, pollution, ambient noise, pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, you name it. These multi-cluster sensors are going to be able to collect information and basically be a Fitbit for the city looking at each neighborhood. What's interesting about what they're doing there is that they're making this data open source so that app developers as well as city planners can do things like design an app that would allow you to say, well, I have asthma and I'd like to walk from my house to my office in a route that has no pollutants right now, and that also has other pedestrians around me so that I don't get mugged on my way back and forth. These are real projects that are starting to roll out around the world. And then we have next generation vehicles, driverless cars. There are all kinds of things happening in the car manufacturing space. One is the move to electric vehicles and hybrid electric vehicles, coupled with every single car manufacturer, bar none, investing very heavily in artificial intelligence to allow for all kinds of degrees of autonomy in driverless vehicles. In the model year 2020 or 2021, it is going to be extremely commonplace for the new car that you buy to have autonomous mode features. You may only use it on a highway instead of cruise control, but as you start to buy new cars, you're going to see increased autonomy. And with it comes a lot of tricky situations, as well as a lot of benefits. So one of the things that's going to be tricky is to deploy enough EV charging stations around the country so that as these new model cars come out, we can actually charge them up. And there's a difference between regular EV chargers and fast EV chargers. You don't want to be sitting at the equivalent of a petrol station for 4 hours or more while you're charging. You need to do it fast, just like you were pumping petrol today. But another consideration is also how will these cars be programmed if there's an unavoidable accident? Who is going to make that ethical decision about who gets injured when there's no other choice? Will it be the people in the car or perhaps a pedestrian that walks in front of the car? Or what if the passenger in the car is someone that is considered of high value, like maybe the President of the United States? Would the car have different rules if it had a VIP passenger? Now, this is a picture that I took 2 years ago at the Consumer Electronics Show. It's a concept car from Toyota called iConcept, and it is gorgeous from almost any angle that you look at. It is sleek, it has gull wings, it has the most beautiful lighting you can imagine. But one of the really interesting aspects of it, of course it has AI, is that it allows you to work in either autonomous mode, so the car drives itself, or if you actually want to drive the car, you can. But if it senses that you are starting to fall asleep, it'll take over for you. Right here in Australia, there are lots of driverless car and bus trials going on. One that's happening in Canberra that's of particular interest to me involves elderly citizens and is allowing them to test drive driverless cars on a test track to see how well they're able to cope with being able to take over in a situation where humans need to take back control. Because while cars are mostly autonomous, there are still situations where humans need to take over. It's what they call level 4 autonomy. Level 5 is you never need a human in the loop. But what they have found is that the citizens that have been participating in these trials are finding that they really enjoy driving in these driverless vehicles, and they want to be able to take them out onto the real road. And part of the reason is that as people age, they become more hesitant in the way that they drive. They start to become afraid to drive fast at the speed limit or maybe change lanes. And many people, after a certain age, don't drive at all. Whereas if you had a car that was mostly autonomous or fully autonomous, you would maintain your social freedom and be able to do the things that you would do with a car today and only have to perhaps take over when there's an incident that requires intervention. So today, even though a car might be autonomous, you still need to pay attention to what's going on. Another really interesting thing that's already being rolled out around the world are drones or flying robots. They may be manually controlled or completely autonomous. Do any of you own a drone? Raise your hands high so I can see them, a couple. Are they manually controlled, so you're controlling it with like an iPhone app or something like that? Yep. That's how most of them are controlled today. And they're doing things like being able to assist in emergency situations like floods and cyclones to help people get insurance compensation faster. They're being used to do videography for real estate, to do asset inspection of telco infrastructure and electricity infrastructure. But where it's going to get really interesting is with autonomous drone delivery and also autonomous flying taxis. Gosh, does that sound science fiction? Well, this picture in the bottom right corner is me with the first flying taxi that was a working prototype. It was taken a couple of years ago from a Chinese company called Ehang, completely autonomous, one passenger, and it could fly at up to 100 kilometers an hour for about 23 kilometers, and you get in, you use an app, and you tell it which A to B point you want to go to. But you've got to think, hang on, what if something goes wrong and I'm all the way up there? Who's going to help me out? So what's starting to happen that I'm finding really interesting, and this is just in the last couple of months, is there's a dichotomy starting to take place in the flying taxi arena. Companies like Uber and Volocopter are now starting to have these electric autonomous drones that carry passengers, but are deploying them with human pilots in the first test. And in fact, there's a test that's starting to take place in Melbourne. We're one of the cities that Uber is rolling out in. But there are other companies like eHang and many others that are going completely autonomous. Personally, at this stage of development, I think I'd rather have a human pilot in the early stages. But what's fascinating is that because they're electric vehicles and they're a lot lighter in weight than a traditional helicopter, they're much more fuel efficient, up to 90% more efficient. From a healthcare perspective, there's some really interesting things going on. In the Netherlands, graduate students at TU Delft designed a flying ambulance with an onboard defibrillator. And it first was designed as part of a grad project in 2014. And the idea is that if someone, a layperson, sees a person nearby them that they may know or not know having some kind of cardiac situation, they can call the equivalent of 911 and have one of these drones get out to them within 1 minute, flying at over 100 kilometers an hour. And it's got an AV system where trained operators and paramedics are able to guide a layperson through using the onboard defibrillator. And that saves lives because typically people who are having a cardiac situation will die within 6 to 7 minutes or 6 to 8 minutes, and it typically would take an ambulance at least 10 minutes to get to them. So I've been tracking this project since 2014. They're still working on the project, and they've been doing trials with real people. And what they are finding is that when a layperson is calling this drone, which hones in on the GPS signal on their phone, and then being guided to do defibrillation, there's about a 20% success rate. However, if that person has been trained on how to use the defibrillation ahead of time, there's a 90% success rate. So one of the things that we might see in the future is that people will volunteer to be trained on how to use these flying defibrillators, much like people get trained on CPR techniques or Heimlich maneuvers today, and that we might have fleets of these, not just in the Netherlands, but perhaps throughout the world and here in New South Wales, where we have equipment that can get to people really quickly and population that is trained on how to use this equipment and can save lives. Another fascinating use of drone technology, completely autonomous, is this example from a company called Zipline. And they are delivering medical supplies completely autonomously in Rwanda and more recently in Ghana. And the way that this drone works is that they have it pre-programmed to be able to go from their distribution centers where they stock things like blood and other medical supplies to base hospitals and other medical centers. And the drone flies at over 100 kilometers. So let's say you need to get blood at a particular hospital. You take out your smartphone, you send a text to Zipline. They load the drone up with the appropriate type of blood. Then, as the drone is approaching you, and it goes really fast, and it has actually an 80-kilometer radius that it can fly, it will send you back an SMS message and say, I'm 1 minute away. And as it gets close, It drops a parachute from about 30 feet up with the medical supplies. So it texts you and says, I'm getting ready to drop off the designated supply. Come out and get ready to retrieve it. And they're delivering all kinds of medical supplies, and they reckon that they can reach about 13 million people. This is the kind of technology that could be really useful even here in a developed country for remote and regional areas, especially because it doesn't require any special skills to be able to use it. All you need to do is to be able to send a text and look at the message on your smartphone and retrieve the package. Another game-changing technology is Hyperloops. Has anyone heard of a Hyperloop? Few people. So let me give you a description. A Hyperloop is the next generation of super fast trains. And what you have is a tube where you suck out all of the air so that it has near vacuum conditions. And by doing that, you're eliminating air friction. And that allows you to hurdle pods that have either cargo or people through them at super fast speeds. So an average cruising speed is 750 kilometers an hour, and a top speed is estimated at about 1,100 to 1,300 kilometers an hour. That's really fast. This is a real test track that's out in the Nevada desert. There are a number of companies around the world that are looking at Hyperloop as a transport mode of the future. And there are Hyperloops that are starting to be deployed and developed in many parts of the world. One of the first places where we're going to see a live Hyperloop, most likely next year, is in the Middle East, in the UAE, going between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and it will cut down an hour-and-a-half drive to about 12 minutes. Here in Australia, there have been a number of proposals for Hyperloops, primarily along the East Coast, but going into regional centers. Can you imagine being able to get from Sydney to Newcastle in 10 minutes? How much of a game changer would that be? There's a company that's based out of RMIT called Vic Hyper that has put up this particular proposal of a potential Hyperloop. There's another global company called HTT, Hyperloop Transport Technologies, that recently did a parliamentary submission saying that they believe that they could roll out a Hyperloop system along East Coast Australia within about a 4-year period and have a return on investment within about 5 to 15 years or even less. Right now, our politicians are talking about fast trains still. I don't know why they're not paying attention to the next generation of technology when every other country around the world is doing it. I've personally talked to a number of polys, and they don't even know what a Hyperloop is. It's kind of crazy, but this could be a real game changer, especially for healthcare, because this means that you can actually have people living out in regional areas or transported to and from regional areas to base hospitals and CBD really quickly and really efficiently. Another really interesting technology is augmented reality. And with augmented reality, what we are doing is literally superimposing images of the digital world on top of the things that we see. And you can do it with a smartphone or a tablet by holding it up and seeing extra information on top of, let's say, this audience with all of your names. I might look out and see your names, or you can use glasses. But there's some fascinating business cases for using augmented reality in a healthcare situation. This is just one of many examples. It's from a company called Oxide that was a spin-out of Cambridge University. And there was a neuroscientist there who was looking at different eye diseases And in particular, things like macular degeneration and retinitis pigmentosa and other diseases where people are legally blind but still have some vision left. And what he designed is a pair of augmented reality glasses that literally lets a person hyper-focus in on particular areas so that they have, in effect, regained their vision to the point where this lady in the bottom picture is able to read sheet music and play an instrument even though she is legally blind. How incredible is that? Another technology that is being very widely used in healthcare is 3D printing. Do any of you have a 3D printer? No. Okay. Well, they're being used in healthcare for all kinds of things, whether it be printing stem cells, printing bionic ears that give you a better range of hearing than if you had your own natural hearing. They're printing out skin and cartilage and vein using bioprinting techniques. If you've been in a horrible accident, let's say, and have your face smashed in, they're using CT scans and MRI scans to print out a prototype image of what your face looks like so that they can do surgery on it, and then printing out things like a titanium jaw that is exactly fitted to the way that your face is post-accident to make you look like the way you were before the accident. And they're checking it before they do the surgery that it has the proper fit and getting really good results. These are the sorts of technologies that ought to be funded by our healthcare systems because there are major benefits. There are also really interesting innovations in this whole area called bioprinting, and the ultimate goal here is to be able to print out with 3D printers replacement organs. And I actually thought this was a fair way out, but there was an announcement earlier this year from a team in Israel that has printed a miniature living 3D human heart using human stem cells as the bio-ink. So it's miniature, it's only about the size of a rabbit. And you can see that
this
they're
is the
using
first time that a
these
whole
special
cellular
gels.
heart with blood vessel is printed. And another major breakthrough is that it is printed from the materials of the patient itself.
So it only takes a couple of hours to 3D print the mini heart, but then it takes at least about a month or so to let the heart start to grow. They still have some challenges with it in that once it's grown, they still have to get everything all pumping together, so it pumps, but not necessarily in unison. So there's some challenges, but they're planning animal trials within the next 2 years. And it's very likely that within 10 years, you're going to see 3D printers in hospitals that are capable of printing out any kind of organ that needs replacement just from someone's own stem cells. That is going to be such a game changer. No more transplant list, no more need for immunosuppressant drugs, no more need for organ donors. Can you imagine the impact on society that that kind of technology will have? Another really important technology that is going to impact, in my view, every single person and every single business on this planet is artificial intelligence. When I talk about AI, I'm using it as an umbrella term. It means a lot of different things, and there are a lot of interrelated technologies. So you may have heard the terms machine learning and deep learning. That's part of AI. Image recognition is part of it, facial detection, emotion detection, both from your face, the tone of your voice, the cadence of your words, that's part of it too. Natural language processing, and being able to understand what you type or what you speak, voice recognition, speech translation, chatbots, smart robots, driverless cars, recognizing gestures. All of it is part of this big umbrella branch of artificial intelligence, and there will be major impacts in the world of healthcare. One of the areas where we will see AI becoming very prevalent in healthcare is in helping to diagnose diseases. I do not see AI as replacing doctors, but I see AI as an assistive technology. So can you imagine that you have a doctor, whether it be a GP or a specialist, they have all kinds of administrative tasks that take up their time. What if they had an AI that could automate all of that boring stuff and free them up to actually see more patients? AI is being developed by a number of companies to help with new drug discoveries, looking at the many thousands of combinations of proteins that are out there that are similar in composition to existing drugs, and doing it through pattern recognition, and starting to come up with ideas to present to researchers on new possibilities for drugs that might help people. Stanford University is developing an AI called Decagon that is being used to look at the side effects of polypharmacy, where you prescribe multiple drugs to the same person. So if you have only one drug, you might have up to 1,000 side effects. But when you start taking 2 drugs at a time, or 3 or 4 or 5, you start to get into this exponential area where you can have up to 125 billion different possible combinations of side effects. Right now, they're at a stage where they're only experimenting with 2 drugs at a time, but already they have detected side effects that were previously unknown with drugs called Norvasc and Lipitor, and have detected that muscle inflammation is another side effect, and that wasn't actually a known side effect of these 2 drugs before. But somewhere in the not-too-distant future, GPs and other health practitioners will have access to this kind of AI that will help them to understand what the potential mix of drug cocktails that are fully prescribed for a patient might do and what those possible side effects might be. Chatbots are another area that is being widely tested and already deployed in the healthcare space. This is a chatbot called Babylon, and in the UK, the National Health Service has deployed Babylon to help with first-level clinical-grade triage of patients. So one of the problems that healthcare systems have is that there's typically a waiting list by the time or from the time that a patient presents with symptoms before they get to see a doctor. So with this AI that uses natural language, you can actually talk to it and say, I'm not feeling so good, and it will ask you, well, tell me what's wrong, and then start to drill down into what it is that you're complaining about, and either send you to see a GP, or maybe go to the emergency room, or maybe go to the local chemist to pick up some aspirin, or to pick up a wrapper for a sprained ankle. And when it's not sure, it will direct you to a human. It's a way of reducing the time that it will take to get immediate attention to an emergent healthcare situation. And let's face it, time factors are often really critical. The way that they've trained this is using a technique called deep learning, and the company Babylon has a very, very large database that it's accumulated of all kinds of healthcare information and a lot of different diseases. But when they started to roll it out in Rwanda, what they quickly found out was that the database needed to be updated and customized for local situations. Because in Rwanda, one of the things that is very prevalent is malaria, and that wasn't one of the things that the chatbot was initially looking for. So there's still a need for humans in the loop to make sure that these devices, these smart AIs, are doing the right thing. And that will continue. It's part of what I call reinforcement learning. Image recognition is another major aspect of how AI will be used in the healthcare area. We're already seeing it being used by radiologists to detect things like breast cancer or lung cancer or pneumonia. But there's an app, this company is called DermEffects, and they've got this app called Visual DX. And it runs on a smartphone, and it's able to let a doctor, a GP, take a picture of some kind of skin issue and using a giant database, determine whether that is something that might be precancerous, a rash, poison ivy, and to help the GP decide what they need to do as the next step in directing patient care. It's available for free, but to really get the most benefit, you need a subscription model as well. We're also seeing lots of medical robots. This is the Da Vinci robot. Are many of you familiar with this? They're being used in a lot of hospitals around Australia, and at RPA, they've invested fairly heavily in the Da Vinci robot, where they're able to train about 400 surgeons per year. Right now, it's being used to help a lot of people with prostate operations. And what has been shown is that using the robot arm, which is controlled by a surgeon, so you're not getting rid of the doctor, you're just giving the doctor a new tool, it is cutting back on the bleeding and scarring and recovery time. And that means that people get out of the hospital a lot faster than they would otherwise, with a lot less pain and a lot less scarring. It's also been starting to be used on breast cancer as well. So there are many benefits, but there's a cost affiliated with it, and it can be fairly expensive. In Queensland, they've been experimenting with different kinds of companion robots in their hospitals. The robot on the left side is called Tessa, and you can see how cute and friendly it looks. It's being trialed right now in 2 different hospitals in Brisbane, and what's really interesting about Tessa is that it's able to translate 26 different languages, so you can see that there's some real benefit there with Tessa that most humans wouldn't have. How many of you speak 26 languages? Anybody? And it's able to do things like tell jokes and be a companion to sick kids. Last year, they were trialing another companion robot called Pepper up in Townsville, and you can see the picture of Pepper with one of the patients. And again, there are a lot of these companion robots that are starting to be rolled out, and they're multifunctional, and they're usually designed to look humanoidish and very cute. Another type of robot that's being deployed is a human support robot. This is from Toyota, so you may think of them as designing only cars, but they've been in the space of designing other types of robots as well for quite some time. What's interesting about this particular robot is that it's got all kinds of cameras on its faceplate and on its hands, and it's able to do image recognition of all kinds of objects in the room. And on its one hand, it has graspers as well as vacuum suction cups. So it can do something like pick up a piece of paper or pick up a pair of glasses. What I really like about this robot, and you can't see it in this picture, but on its faceplate, it has cameras and microphones, so you can use it for video conferencing too. So let's say you have somebody that's either in a hospital or in an elder care situation, and you as a family member live far away. Imagine if you could actually video conference through this robot and literally be by the bedside of someone that you love and care about on a regular basis, or if you're a carer, to be able to look in and see how well a patient is doing. The objective behind this robot is to allow people to remain in their home environment for a lot longer, or even if they're in an elder care environment, to allow them greater independence and have, a guardian watching over them. Speaking of guardians, this is an exoskeleton robot called Guardian Max XO. It's from a company called Sarcos Robotics. And in this exoskeleton, it has all kinds of sensors that react within milliseconds to the motions of a wearer. And it is able to not only take its own weight, but allow the wearer to lift up to 200 pounds as if it were nothing. So that's about 97 kilos. So literally, 100 pounds feels like you're lifting 5 pounds. And in the healthcare industry, there's a lot of occupational and safety hazards when you're picking up patients or picking up other heavy materials. This kind of exoskeleton could be really useful for helping in moving patients around, but it can also be used in other industrial aspects as well. And while I'm talking about exoskeletons, I should mention that there are lots of exoskeletons that are being designed to give mobility to people who have no mobility otherwise, who might even be paralyzed and are now able to walk around thanks to exoskeletons. Another innovation is something called the Proteus pill, which is a tiny little chip about the size of a pinhead that can be embedded inside of drugs, and it transmits from inside a person's digestive system to a patch that they wear on their wrist or maybe their chest through Bluetooth, and then from there to a phone, and it allows you to track how many and what quantity drugs you have taken in a period of time. So already, this particular sensor has been approved by the FDA for embedding in a pill called Abilify from Otsuka, which is a pharmaceutical company. And people are taking this, and you're able to determine how often a patient has taken a drug and in what quantity. And that will help doctors understand when someone says, oh, the drug's not working, whether they've actually been taking it according to instruction, or whether perhaps they're not taking it at all, or they're taking the wrong dosage. And let's face it, you don't have to have any kind of cognitive disorder to forget whether or not you've taken the right amount of pills in a given period. So I can see that this is going to be a really important tool as we move into the future, and that this is just the first of many drugs that will utilize this kind of chipset embedded in a pill to help us better understand how medicines are taken. There's also new innovations that will help to eliminate blood clots. Let me show you this little video from a company called Capture.
The catheter is first positioned just proximal to the clot. The funnel mouth at the tip of the catheter is then deployed, occluding blood flow with its silicone elastomer on the distal aspect of the funnel. This results in the mouth of the funnel tip being maximally expanded in a radial fashion by the patient's own blood pressure, creating a seal against the arterial wall and arresting blood flow. Cessation of blood flow prevents clot fragments from traveling downstream, greatly reducing the potential for distal embolization. The patient's blood pressure, along with the radial force of the funnel tip, combine to press the device against the arterial wall. Once the megavac arrests blood flow, the thrombo wire is inserted through the catheter, advanced through the clot, and deployed distal to the clot. While applying suction with the megavac, the thrombo wire is retracted to simultaneously pull the clot into the funnel mouth and through the catheter. After complete clot removal, suction is discontinued and the catheter tip is undeployed, restoring distal blood flow.
A cool new way to get rid rid of blood clots, and this is a commercial innovation. This isn't future, this is now. And what that means for the workforce is you're going to need to be able to train people on these new technologies and bring them into the healthcare system here. Scientists are experimenting with lots and lots of tiny robots. This is an example from MIT. It's still very experimental. And what they have is a tiny robot that is like an origami robot that folds up, and they've encapsulated inside of an ice capsule. And it's designed to help people who have swallowed button batteries. And for some reason, people do this on a regular basis, and they lodge in your esophagus or in your stomach. And it can cause a very serious inflammation requiring surgery. So instead of cutting you open, what you do is you take this pill that has an ice capsule. It's guided by the surgeon through magnets to the exact place where the button battery is located. As it goes through your digestive system, the ice capsule is melted, and when it gets to the right place, the surgeon is able to unfold this origami robot. It then plucks the button battery out from the area that it has become lodged in, and it injects an anti-inflammatory, and everything gets washed out through your digestive system. That's a lot better than getting cut open, isn't it? Now, this robot, even though it's tiny, is huge compared to some of the robots that are being worked on that are millimeter size and even nanometer size that are still in the research labs. So going into the future, what will we humans be like? Will we take technology into our body? Well, one of the first places that we're likely to take technology into our body on a non-permanent basis is with smart contacts. And a lot of companies have been working on this for a long time now. What's fascinating about smart contacts is they combine ICT, so the same sort of things that you'd find on your smartphone, facial recognition, the ability to take pictures or videos literally by blinking your eyes, and adding in biotech as well. And this is where it gets fascinating. There are all kinds of pharmaceutical companies that are looking at applications like giving you auto-sensing capabilities for your eyesight depending on where you're looking. So if you need reading glasses, you can ditch them forever and just use these smart contacts and have all these capabilities that you would have on your smartphone, plus augmented reality and healthcare. Another area that they're looking at is using chemicals in your tear ducts to be able to diagnose disease conditions. For example, lacroglobin can help you detect insulin levels and send up an augmented reality display that says it's time to take your insulin shot. Or even start to look at things like intraocular pressure and determine whether you're starting to develop diseases like glaucoma. So the big picture here is an example from Google from 2014, and you can see there's a lot of opaque bits. The smaller picture is from 2016, and you can see that there's a lot less bits in there that are opaque. By the time this comes to market, these contact lenses will be completely transparent, most likely made out of a material called graphene that's harder than diamonds, conducts electricity fantastically, can be made super thin, and not only that, but it will be giving you multi-functions. However, there's a gotcha in this. I've been tracking this for at least 5 years now, and every year they keep saying it will be available in 5 to 7 years, and then it moves out another 5 to 7 years and another 5 to 7 years. My understanding from talking to scientists is that the issue is more on the pharmaceutical side of things than the ICT side of things, but sooner or later, probably within the next 10 years, we're going to start to see these smart contacts coming onto the market. And people will be wanting to wear them because they are multifunctional and giving them all kinds of information. And you will be downloading apps that may be apps like your smartphone apps, as well as biotech apps for your smart glasses. And that's going to be a big game changer. But what happens if we start putting chips into our head? So already you would be used to the idea of implants for things like pacemakers or insulin pumps. Well, the idea is that to keep up with AI, which is becoming smarter and smarter all the time, maybe we'll need to stick AI chips into our own brains so that we can connect with the World Wide Web simply by thinking. So can you imagine having a chip in your brain and all you do is think about a question and you get the answer from whatever the Google of the 2030s might be? Or you want to send a message to someone, and instead of typing it out, you just think it, and off it goes. It's like telepathy. And just hope you don't think the wrong thing too fast and send it off. But what if it does something stupid like autocomplete? So how many times have you used an iPhone or an Android smartphone, and you're texting somebody, and it thinks it's so smart and it changes a word and you end up sending an idiotic message? Has that happened to you? It happens to me all the time. What if you have a chip in your brain that incorrectly autocompletes something that you're thinking, and suddenly you're saying the wrong thing that comes out of your mouth? Is it your fault or the AI's fault? Or what if the AI chip picks up on a fleeting thought that you have and acts on it? So how many of you have ever been in traffic and somebody cuts you off and you think, oh, I ought to rear end, him or her? You have that fleeting thought, but you're not going to do it. But the AI chip picks up on it and says, boom, okay, let's go. And off it goes. We need to be careful as we start thinking about the ethics behind taking these chips into our bodies. Now, you may think, oh, that's a long way off. We're not going to see this for years and years and years. Well, guess what? In June, Elon Musk, with his Neuralink company, came out with his first AI chips called N1. They're 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters, and they have 10,000 electrodes in each chip. And they will be implanted into the human brain, and the first test subjects are likely to be people who suffer from paralysis at the end of next year. And they'll be implanting 4 of these chips to help people regain their sensory motion. Now, that's a really good application. But then there are other implications of, what if you take a chip in your brain and it starts to not work so well? What are you going to do? And a whole lot of moral implications, too. So we need to think about both the benefits and the what if as part of our consideration about whether we use these technologies and how we will deploy them. One thing's for sure is that a new job of the future will be human implant specialist, because today we have medical implants, and already there are people that are doing implants in the metacarpal area to do things like open doors or retrieve passwords from their computers. And we're going to see more and more of this, and it's already starting to happen. Another new and amazing area of medicine is with stem cells, and that's this whole area of regenerative medicine. This is a picture of a neurosurgeon by the name of Chris Duma, and he's been working with people who have Alzheimer's. One of his first patients was an 82-year-old gentleman by the name of Jack Sage, who was losing his memory. And at his own cost, because it's not covered by insurance, he decided to use his own stem cells and let Chris drill a hole in his brain and literally inject his own stem cells into his brain to try to revive his memory. After 8 treatments, his hippocampus volume went from the 5th percentile to the 48th percentile. And his memory has also improved. Now, the first step of the trial was really just a safety trial, but these are the things that are really cutting-edge science. Stem cells are interesting. Sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't. But imagine if you had a cognitive disorder where you were losing your memory and had a way of regaining it. Wouldn't that be amazing? Stem cells are also being used in some cutting-edge eye disease therapies, and there's a layer in the back of our eyes called RPE, And it has the ability to basically make the photoreceptors in our eyes work properly. And what scientists at NIH recently found is that there's this protrusion, tube-like cilia that come out of the RPE cells, and that in order for the eye to function properly, you need to have these tube-like protrusions. So they've been doing experiments in taking stem cells and using drugs to coax them into becoming RPEs that also have this cilia type of extrusion to start to treat diseases like advanced or age-related macular degeneration. It's still super experimental, but this is like cutting-edge technology that we can expect to see in hospitals probably within a 10-year period or maybe even less, depending on what kind of stem cell therapy we're talking about and what kind of disease that we're treating. Another whole new category of jobs will be involved in regenerative medicine. And there will be people who both design this technology, there'll be technicians who basically harvest stem cells and grow them. There'll be other technicians and doctors that inject them into the right places, either through IVs or directly into organs, and monitor the progress. It's a whole new growth field, and you're going to need to staff up with people who are able to take these skill sets as part of their repertoire. We're also going to see a lot of nanobots, super, super tiny robots. Now, this is just a graphic image. It's not a real nanobot, but it's an illustration. Already in China, at one of their national institutes for neuro research, in conjunction with Arizona State University, they have designed nanobot-sized blood clotting cancer solutions. So what they are doing is taking rolls of DNA and using the input from a person's body and literally having inside these rolls of DNA a drug that is able to starve a tumor by cutting off blood. And the way that they deploy it is on the outside of this DNA roll, there's a special protein that attaches only to cancers of a particular type. So the doctors are able to guide the nanobots to the area where this particular type of cancer has grown, and then they deploy these little bots to roll out, and they literally starve off the blood cell of cancer. So what we're talking about is precision medicine and treating cancer without impacting other organs. So today, if you have a cancer and you get chemotherapy or radiology, it's basically irradiating your whole body. With this kind of treatment, it literally will be starving off the blood cells from the cancer and killing the cancer tumors. That's the promise. We're probably at least 10 years away from that happening. But as we start to take these nanobots into our bodies, we're going to need whole new skill sets. And one of the new jobs of the future is something that I'm calling a nanomedic. And a nanomedic will be people who both design these kinds of new therapies as well as start to implement them on patients and also be there to rescue people if something goes wrong and you need to somehow get these bots out of your bodies. Because if something goes wrong, you don't want to have a bot in your body for the rest of your life that's doing you harm. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's an amazing new area that will require brand new skill sets. Genetic engineering is another fascinating space. By 2025, it's estimated that we'll have sequenced between 100 million and 2 billion of the human genes. And that will allow us to do really targeted precision medical intervention. We'll be able to design drugs that are specifically targeted to your DNA, your genetic profile, your body weight, and everything specific to you, and they'll probably be 3D printed, and they may even contain things like stem cells that help you with your own body's materials so that you're not facing any kind of immunorejection. In the future, we're going to see jobs like a genetic 3D designer. Because guess what? People aren't going to use this just for disease management. They're going to use it for cosmetic purposes too, like looking younger or looking different, or maybe expressing themselves artistically, or with space exploration on the near-term horizon, I'm talking 10 years, maybe re-engineer our bodies to be able to survive in outer space. This is a whole new frontier, and a whole new wave of jobs will be created by this. How about reversing aging? Anybody here like to go turn the clock back a little bit, keep your wisdom, but have your body look and feel like it was 20 again? Well, researchers at the Salk Institute in the United States have been experimenting with just that. They've been able to genetically engineer cells from humans and mice in petri dishes and turn back the clock. And in several living mice, they've been able to turn back the clock too. One mouse had a rapid aging disease called progeria, and they were actually able to make that mouse younger again. Can you imagine? But it gets even better. There's a professor called Yanir Baryam who believes that that aging is the result of a genetic switch that we'll be able to find, and we'll be able to turn it on and off within the next 10 to 20 years. And when we do, our lifespans will radically increase. Can you imagine living to be 400 or 800 years old? Can you imagine working for 400 years? Can you imagine being married to the same person for 800 years? What is that going to do to our society, much less our healthcare system? People often say to me, with all this technology and automation, what's going to happen with jobs? Look, when it comes to robots and jobs, whether it be AI bots or physical robots, there are a number of things you need to take into account. First is whether it's technically feasible now or in the near-term future to deploy automation. Second, how much is it going to cost? Third is, what is the cost of labor? How does that business case stack up? Or do you have a scarcity of labor and you really need to automate because you don't have people who can do the job? But then there's also the regulatory impact as well. So if I look at something like driverless cars, if we had governments that said, on highways, we're going to dedicate a lane for autonomous vehicles, you'd see a much quicker uptake than if you didn't. And the same things with drones and flying taxis. If we had regulation that said, you can only use drones where you have line-of-sight delivery, you're not going to be able to use drones to do remote delivery of medical supplies, whereas if you were allowed to use autonomous drones in regional areas to do parachute drops of medical supplies, you'll see them roll out. But there's also things like social acceptance. So how well will people adapt to robots in their environment? Well, in science fiction, there are all kinds of stories of people who both accepted and didn't accept robots, and you've probably seen a lot of them. There will be lots of new jobs, however. How many of you have wearables that are on your body right now? Quite a few. It's going to get more and more sensitive as time goes on, especially as we start taking drugs that have sensors embedded in them. One new job category are going to be biosensing experts who are able to help people take all this massive amount of information and make sense of it, either from a preventative basis or from a disease management basis. And this is going to be a really important new job of the future. Something that many of you will need to think about is how HR is going to transform. So today it's about human resources. Tomorrow it's going to be still HR, but the head of human and robot orchestration, deciding where do I use a living human being, where do I use a software bot, where do I use a physical robot? How do I manage the interaction between all of this? And how do I take real-time information that might be coming in off of social media or other IoT sensors and transform our company to act in an agile manner? Another super important job of the future is going to be a chief ethics officer, and this is going to be a C-suite level job. When it comes to AI, there are so many ethics involved, not least of which is if a job is automated either in full or in part, who decides, what will happen to that person? Will they be reskilled and redeployed, or will you do the wrong thing and just fire them and try to save money? Other ethical issues include, the brain-machine interfaces and, how do we deploy them ethically, or driverless cars, or unintended consequences. With AI, one of the things that people don't often talk about is that as you use these big deep learning databases, you're feeding machines with information that is just so massive that humans don't know everything that's contained in there. And often there are social biases that get fed into the machine deep learning or machine learning algorithm, and then they display unexpected behavior or biases, and we need to do reinforcement learning to correct for that. And then there's unintended consequences. Let's say you have an AI and you set a goal for it of eliminating breast cancer, and since women tend to be the most prevalent victims in this particular disease, this AI decides that the best way of eliminating breast cancer is eliminating women. That would not be a very good outcome, would it? So we need to really think about ethics with all kinds of technologies. But what I want to close with, and this is really important, especially in healthcare, is that the human touch is so important. People want empathy. They want somebody who's going to be there and understand their emotional needs and not just be a robot who pretends to understand emotion, but can really hold their hand and hug them and help them and be with them. So I think that the human touch is going to be a really important part of our future as well. Thank you so very much.